Good evening, everybody. We'll be joining you in about 2 minutes. So welcome to Guiding Your Career Live. Hi, everybody. I'm John Self, and welcome to our Career Live, Guiding Your Career, here at 7:30 on Wednesday night. This was originally scheduled as one of our regular ongoing weekly group coaching sessions. We're making some changes, so we'll talk about that at the end of the stream tonight. The chat lines are open. If you're on YouTube, just send us messages, and I think we'll kind of try to keep an eye on the chat on YouTube. And let's see. It should come in on our Restream platform where we are. We're also on LinkedIn tonight. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's a hot night in Texas. And so we've got some good things to talk to you about. And with a lot of things happening economically, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of the issues regarding the tariff regimen, some softness in the private hiring, some increases in prices, some big losses in the automotive industry. There are a lot of moving parts, and there are some pretty bright Wall Street guys. Not all of them. There's some people always looking for the optimistic side and looking to make more money. But some of the longer running guys on Wall Street are saying that we may be approaching a major correction. And when you say something like correction on the equities market, that may mean prices move around. So there's a sell-off. But it doesn't affect the broader market, businesses, that sort of thing. But we're looking at some potential economic disruptions. Charlie Smead has estimated it could be one that could last up to a decade. Now, does anybody know? No, nobody knows for sure. But what you can't afford to do is in your career today is move forward and just take everything for granted and just assume everything's going to work out. So let's get started and talk about some of the things we want to really focus in on tonight. And this is one of my favorite subjects. Get ahead of myself. It's really the 4 elements for success in career management. Now, a lot of people view career management as just finding a job. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is a whole regimen. It's like marketing is not sales. Sales is part of marketing. Well, look at finding a job as part of career management. And so as you have questions tonight, we'll be happy to stop and take them. We don't use names on this because some of you may not want anybody to know you're in the market or thinking about going to the market. So tonight we're going to talk about the 4 elements to be successful. So the agenda, we're going to talk briefly, for those of you who don't know me, we're going to go through my credentials just so you'll know that, yeah, I have a little experience in this field. We're going to first talk about understanding the market. That's really important. Second, understanding your value. That's even more important. Finally, next, the importance of a career plan, and then the make or break element that nobody likes to talk about, and far too many people avoid it to their peril, and that is networking. And this market now, if you're not networking, you are asking for serious, serious hurt. Not medicine cabinet hurt. I'm talking about serious career setback. Let me introduce myself. I'm John Self. I've been, and I was in the healthcare industry primarily. I began my career as a crime writer and investigative journalist. I finished my career in the news business on the wild, mean streets of Houston. I have 38 years of executive search and career development, business development, and career coaching. So I've had a lot of varied experiences. I've gone through 4 career changes, all very positive, all elected, and all led to great new exciting things. I've recruited in 40 states. I've worked internationally in 6 countries on 4 continents. So I've interviewed a lot of different people, 9,000 to be exact. I've taught numerous courses on interviewing, and it has been an incredible career. I started out, as I said, as a newspaper reporter. I was the first director of Life Flight at Herman Hospital. I set up the next 14 programs nationally. I set up several other businesses, built businesses, created my own search firms, did turnarounds for rural community hospitals, a lot of different things. And I absolutely loved my career. Absolutely loved it. I worked for some jerks. I was in some toxic organizations, but I always learned from those things. They say if you really want to learn about leadership, go work for a bad leader. That'll teach you everything you need to know. But one of the things I'll tell you, that if I had to replicate that career today in this market, I probably couldn't do it. Because today you have to be very precise, you have to be very intentional, and I hate to say this because nobody likes to talk about it, you're going to have a plan, and it's not something rattling around in your brain. It is a plan where you are, you have to be very intentional, and you have to hold yourself accountable, and you have to have key performance indicators. So we're talking about a strategic plan for your career, much like you would create as a CEO of a business. So the saying, understanding the market. Well, we have an uncertain economy. It started off pretty good. Everybody was very hopeful after the election. But then we had Liberation Day, and everything's been kind of wobbling since then. We have all sorts of people, the taco people about chickening out again. We have uncertainty. We have delays. We have trade deals that are really more of a formula or a plan, because trade deals are very complicated and usually those aren't negotiated in a 2-page document. So they've agreed on some terms, but there's a lot of details to be worked out. So that just sustains the uncertainty. In this new market, because of technology, you're going to have to think about managing your brand in a very intentional way. In the past, we all said, oh, LinkedIn, it's great. We put a profile up. Everybody said that's great. Let's see, we're getting some questions here. You just have to be very, very intentional, and you have to be very specific, and you have to understand that now there's a lot of passive recruiting going on, and I'll explain that to you in just a few minutes. But people are, computers are looking at your profile, they're looking at your content online, and they're trying to decide if you would be a good fit for the job that they're secretly looking to fill. And it's all being done with computers, and computers are running things now from applicant sourcing to the initial screening, including behavioral profiles, just based on what they find about you online. So you have to be very intentional about your comm plan, your posting plan. How do you manage your LinkedIn profile? And you have to do all this within the context of the fact that the clients, because there is a white collar recession, there are more people in management executive ranks looking for jobs than there are real jobs these days. And so they can afford to be more selective. It's not uncommon to hear people talk about, I did 8 interviews for a company and still didn't get the job. And I don't even know if they knew what they wanted to hire. And that's a legitimate question. Sometimes these companies don't know what they want to hire. And sometimes they have so many good choices, they can't make a choice. So they're being more selective. Sometimes that selective process is dysfunctional. And, it's a meat grinder for candidates. And sometimes you just have to say, I'm walking away. I'm not going to keep investing my time, because the longer it goes on, the worse the odds get. Not just for you, but for everybody. And finally, we are going to talk about, the importance of elite interviewing skills. A lot of people get to their dream job and they don't get it, but not because they weren't qualified, not because they didn't have great credentials. Some people even had, elite school MBAs, but because they didn't communicate their value. And that's going to be so important going forward. So let's talk about why things are different, why the market's different. Well, the best way to say is there's 2 pillars. technology and structural change. And it's really prevalent in the executive job segment. It will require you to have a more precise approach to career management. And this is unlike anything we've seen before. So I'll liken it to the old analog radio days, and then we had FM. The signal was more crisp. It was easier to tune in. It didn't skip around like the analog system did off the ionosphere, but it provided a higher quality of sound. Analog is, think of it as it's like the old dial-up computer versus the high-speed internet connection. The first was not always consistent. It was sometimes very, very slow. When everybody wanted to get online at night, sometimes you couldn't get online with new high-speed digital modems. It's now changed the way we connect to the internet. It's the same concept in the job market. You have to be more precise because technology is eliminating wiggle room. It's eliminating room for mistakes. And as I said, this is unlike anything we've seen before. So going back, excuse me, I'm waiting for them to catch up with me. There we go. Sorry about that. One of the things we're all concerned about, and there has been a lot of talk. I look at 4 or 5 business journals a day, including the Wall Street Journal and Business Insider. And what everybody's concerned with is some unforeseen economic disruption due to a recession. Now, it could be a recession, less concerning because that while that can be bad, and big, deep recession can hurt a lot of people, it is the thing they're more concerned with is something called stagflation, where you have you have an increase in prices and a drop in demand, and then you have the other thing that's really serious, and people are watching very carefully right now, is the bond market and the treasury yields. That could trigger a credit crisis. And that could be really, really serious and have some catastrophic consequences. Think of the 2008, 2009, when we had the real estate bubble. A credit crisis could be like that on steroids. It took 5, 6, 7 years for some people just to kind of get a normal life going again. And some people are still trying to repair the damage from 2008, 2009 in their retirement plans, their 401k plans. With a credit crisis, you could see unemployment time to hire sequences go from the current 8 to 14 months to up to 24 months or longer. I mean, that's entirely possible. Why? Because in the executive level, management level, we have what is called a white-collar recession. After the pandemic, companies did not bring back all of their executives. They discovered they didn't need as many, and now you hear Alan Jassy and everybody else talking about flattening out the organization. That's a nice term for not hiring people back and keeping expenses down. And so that makes it harder to find jobs. This year alone in technology, there have been 100,000 layoffs. You don't hear about it, but it's happening. So after you understand the market, the next thing you have to do, you absolutely have to understand your value. Why? Because you're going to get that question pretty quick. Tell us about yourself. And what they want to hear is not about your resume. They got that. And if they hadn't read it, maybe you don't want to work for them. What they really want to hear is, why should we hire you? What is your value? What have you accomplished that really relates to what we need to have done here? And you have to do your homework, and then you have to be able to have a compelling statement. This is who I am. This is what I believe. This is why you should hire me. Now, your value is really, it's not a complicated thing. Listen, there's a lot of things about the job market and finding a job that aren't really complicated. Now, it's not easy, but this is not rocket science. Your value is really the sum of your education. It's your credentials, your ACHE credentials, your CPA, your MD, whatever it is, your certification in executive leadership, whatever. It's your credentials. It's your relevant experience. And this is really important today. It's your quantifiable achievements. And the quantifiable achievements is creating a new term for interviewing called value-based interviewing or data-driven interviewing. They want to know, you reduced accounts receivable, how much money did you save? You got the contract, you got the project in under budget and under schedule. How did you do that? How much money did you save? Walk us through the steps that you took to achieve that. They want to know that you know what you're doing and that you can deliver on their needs. So that's the value formula. Now, understand your value. It's really important. But that's only half the challenge. A lot of people lose out because they can't communicate in a compelling way why they are a better selection than their competitors. Now, we haven't really thought about recruiting in a job search as kind of a win-loss deal. But if you're not selected, I'm sorry, you lost. And I don't know about you, but there's only so many times I want to lose. So what you need to do in order to avoid getting eliminated is that you have to be able to understand your value, and you must improve your ability to communicate that value to be able to help the organization see why you are better than your competitors. Now, of all the executives I've interviewed over the years, and I've taught the interviewing course for several professional global organizations, I've interviewed about 9,000 executives, and I'll tell you this, 80% of them are only average. Now, everybody thinks I'm the greatest interviewer in the world, but I'll tell you from having sat through 2 and 3 hour interviews, detailed chronological interviews, that 80% of these people are just average. And in this market, average won't get it. You have to be very good. And really what you want to do is be elite. And you can't get to that point without a lot of hard work and a lot of practice. And that's what we teach in our master class on interviewing, including 5 or 6 mock interviews. So this is really important. This is a skill where most people fall short. They get to the final table. I hear this all the time. I've been to the table 8 times and haven't been picked yet. Yes. Why? Because you're not closing the deal. You may be the best qualified person at the table, but the best qualified person only gets the job about 30 to 35% of the time. So the question is, well, who the heck's getting hired? Well, I'll tell you, it's the person who was qualified, but who did the best job communicating their value to tell the prospective employer, here's what I can do for you. Here's how I'll fix that problem. You can count on me. And you know what? We weren't raised that way. We weren't raised to brag about ourselves. But in the job market today, if you don't beat your drum, nobody else is going to help you, including your competitors. Now, I've had people say this over and again. This has been a long-standing problem in interviewing. The person didn't get picked. Well, why didn't you get picked? You had the 4 things they were looking for. Did you talk about it? Did you close the deal? No. It was in my resume. I just assumed they'd figure it out. That is one of the biggest mistakes. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be cruel. It's one of the dumbest mistakes candidates make. Don't be shy about connecting your skills, your successes, your value to their specific needs. You got to do your homework. You got to understand what this is all about. You have to ask a lot of questions in the early interviews so you can get a handle on that. But when you go into the final interview, you got to be able to close the deal by connecting your value and showing them how you can solve their problems. You have to connect the dots for them. Don't expect them to do it themselves. Now, because the market is changing, we've talked about career planning for years. Unfortunately, there are a lot of graduate school professors, assistant professors, instructors who are grossly misguided on this subject. Their comment, well, it's all going to change. So, it's really a bad idea to kind of narrow yourself down. Good grief. Okay. A business has a strategic plan. If you're going to be a CEO of a business, you're not going to go tell your board chair, hey, listen, everything's going to change. So let's just forget about this planning thing and just wing it. Most people wing their careers. They don't have a plan. If you want to be a CEO of a company, whether it's a Fortune 250, Fortune 500, a health system, manufacturing, retail, whatever it is, if that's what you want to be, move to the top, run a business. If that's really what you want to do, you better get a plan because it's extremely competitive. And there are steps you have to achieve to get to that point, and you need to reverse engineer it. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But career planning is a way for you to be more precise and for you to hold yourself accountable. And it is very, very valid. You are the CEO of you. You run your company, just like you might run a hospital or run a manufacturing company or run, whatever. And you have to have a plan to run a business today, and you have to have a plan to run your career effectively today. You don't want to start out without a plan. As Yogi Berra, the famous New York Yankees catcher, said, if you don't have a plan, you might end up someplace else. And he added later, and you probably won't like it. It's just like expecting someone else to tell your story. If you do, you're probably not going to like what they say. So take accountability, own this, have a career plan. Why? Well, over the years, we would routinely ask candidates when they would come in for interviews, tell me, do you have a written career plan? Only about 23 to 25% of those people had plans. Okay. And you know what we noticed about those 23 to 25%? They were more focused. They were more prepared. They were more energized. They were very precise in terms of connecting their value with the needs of the client. And guess what? If they got displaced along the way, and those things happen to virtually everyone, they were able to rebound faster than those executives and managers who did not plan ahead. Now, if you're looking for the kicker, the reason to do it, that should be high on the list right there. Have the plan, and that will help you recover, because there are going to be some economic uncertainties. There's going to be some detours. There are going to be some market corrections, and you absolutely have to think about that ahead of the game. In 2015, I was delivering an important speech for the American College of Healthcare Executives to a room 300 or 400 people, all concerned about finding a job, keeping a job. And we talked a lot about interviewing, and we talked a lot about the market. At this point in healthcare, a lot of the technology that had been in some of the Fortune 100s and 200 companies in terms of applicant tracking were beginning to move into healthcare at a high rate of speed. And I said, we're witnessing these epic changes in the job market. Technology is dramatically reshaping the rules. Guess what? We say the same thing today, but just it's 20x. Okay, it's 20 times more profound. It's 20 times more complex. It's 20 times more challenging from 2015. And over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see just another tsunami of change. So you absolutely have to pay attention to career management. You just can't afford not to do this. Okay, one of the reasons you have to have a plan, you have to be focused on where you want to be and what you want to accomplish, is because 65% of the executive jobs are not posted online anymore. Matter of fact, the online recruiting business is probably going to end up as more of a staff, early careerist, kind of mid-level range. The senior managers and executives are going to be hired based on passive recruiting, where computers are scanning the internet, including LinkedIn and other sites, looking for potential candidates based on the information on the profile. And then they also are looking at other things that you have online to see, do you fit the personality profile they're looking for? This is all being done without your knowledge, and it's all being done, electronically. Now, virtually 95% of all companies today are moving towards more sophisticated tech. Sites like Indeed, iHire, Zip, those are all variations of automation using algorithms that are intelligent algorithms to sort the applicants, route them to the right computer, to the right client. But those sites too are getting more sophisticated. They've perfected their algorithms, but that's an online posting. And if you're an executive, you're probably not going to find a job you really want through iHire or Indeed. You're going to have to find them by having a network of people around targeted institutions you've identified where you would like to work. Well, I don't know where I'm going to have to be. That's why you do planning. You have to decide if something goes wrong, or if my next step is move up to a larger organization, where do I want that to be? Pick out 4 or 5 of those organizations geographically and start making connections. If you don't go to that level of detail, you're going to face some pretty serious challenges. Now, search firms are also playing less of a role in IDing talent. Computers are taking over. Okay, so you have to understand that. So your LinkedIn profile is more important today than ever, and it has to communicate your value. It can't just talk about from this date to this date I did this and assume everybody's going to find. You have to have a way to work in there that you would achieve certain impressive things. The competition is really, really intense, and if you're out in the market now, you know it. When I was recruiting through about 2018, 2019, the time to hire was probably 4 to 6 months, 7 months maybe. Today, it's running 8 to 14 months based on all the research that we've been able to accrue by talking to candidates. So if we have an economic hiccup and where we have more layoffs, that number will expand. And if you're just applying online, that number could be just a crushing number. We have evidence of people who've applied to 100 to 200 jobs only to get 2 interviews because they were doing it all online. If you're an executive or a manager, that's the dumbest thing you can do. You have to have a network. You may not like networking. You may not like doing networking. I'm sorry. If you want to have the career that you really think you're capable of having, then you're going to have to take more ownership and be more precise and do those things that you may not like to do. Because if you lose your job, you don't have a network, you're probably going to have to do the worst kind of networking, cold calling. If you don't like doing that, then I think you need to be more proactive in building a network. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, one of the things in a marketplace, and I noticed this for years, one of the things we wanted to always be careful of is moving a family, especially if they had young daughters or a son in football or sports, those types of things. And we always laughed that if you had an executive, you had a daughter in high school, if you were moving him halfway across the country, that was something you really needed to be sure the candidate, was slowing down to really take all that in. Because, you as a father or a mom, if you're the executive, you don't want to disrupt your family. But unfortunately, because now we have fewer executive and management job opportunities, even in places like Houston and Dallas and Kansas City and Chicago, across the board, the number of jobs in those segments, that level of the organization, they're now fewer and far between. And there's no indication that hiring is going to pick up again because companies now are used to working with a flatter organization structure, one that's cheaper, one that's more responsive, they would argue. So unfortunately today, as you plan your career, you're going to have to be more open to proactive geographical change. So let's just use the example. I want to be a CEO of a regional health system. And I look around the country and, I identify 10 or 12 of those systems that I've done some research. I think they're really good. That might be a next step for me to take. And so what you do is you start building contacts in those organizations, around those organizations, and throughout the region where those organizations are located. Sometimes you may have 2 or 3 options in one geographic region, the Pacific Northwest or the Upper Midwest or the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic Coast. And you want to build relationships, connections within those organizations. And that's where LinkedIn comes in, really becomes very handy. You're not going to find a job on LinkedIn unless you're very lucky. All LinkedIn is going to help you do research, help you identify potential connections. It's going to help you establish that initial connection, but that connection is not going to help you find a job. Job referrals are based on trust. Trust takes time to build up, so you can't wait till the last minute to say, oh my God, I may lose my job in 3 months. I need to network. Well, good luck. I mean, you may be able to find some people who will help you, but because there are fewer jobs in one given area, you may have to look across multiple regions or multiple cities. And most people, their networks tend to be kind of provincial around where they currently work. So intense competition that we're all seeing. Your networking must align with your targeted markets. If you have a lot of network connections, but they're not where you want to be or not around organizations where you might have to work, then you're missing the boat. A networking plan that's tied to your strategy, your career plan, is called Networking 3.0. And that's the boat you need to be on. That's the train you need to board immediately. Now, as I said earlier, there's a lot of passive recruiting going on. And so you have to be very sophisticated with your brand management, including a lot more aggressive online profile management. You don't know where the next job may pop up. But if it's not in a region you're interested in, that's great. You can pass on it, offer to help them if you get a call. But if it is in an area, having a network in that region that can feed you information might give you the type of advantage you need to be successful over someone else. Now, again, keep in mind, what you post is important. What you say is important. And these sophisticated AI tools are scanning your profile. You won't know it. And they're looking at any online data they can find about you, and they're evaluating your culture and personality match. So in your plan, you have to have a really strong communication plan. What do I want to post? What message do I want to send to those those scanning computers. What value do I want to communicate? This will not happen willy-nilly. You have to be very intentional, very focused. Now, a lot of people have gone through an entire career and they I don't worry. I hope everything's going to work out. Everything has always worked out. I'm really confident. Well, today, hope is really a lousy recruiting career management strategy because everything is not working out for a lot of people. If you're using online applications and no recipe, you don't have a network, that's a recipe for a huge disaster. Why? Because every time you submit a resume, you've got to spend all that time evaluating, customizing your resume, keywords, all that crap that you have to do, and that can take 45 minutes to an hour. So think about filing 200 online applications, and a lot of them now you do the resume, you get it filed, and then they want you to fill out the application, another 30 or 45 minutes or more. So online is a great waste of time, especially since you only have a 3 to 5% chance for success. And if you put it in Vegas odds, it's like 250 to 1. Don't do that. To do 200 online applications just to get one interview for a job you may not even want because it doesn't have the compensation you need is crazy. If you get yourself boxed in the corner and say, I'm not going to leave Houston, or I'm not going to leave Dallas, I'm not going to leave Texas, you may have to in order to grow your career and move up. Do you want, if you have a nice lifestyle and you live in Dallas and you can't find a job in Dallas, you're either going to have to take a job at less money out of your industry perhaps, and then you're going to have to change your lifestyle. And it's very difficult to recover from that. So you have to be intentional at every step of the game today. Now, the important thing is to enjoy your job and to have a great family life and have great friends and be involved in the community. But you must carve out time so that you can manage your career. You didn't always have to do that in the past. Technology now mandates it. And if you want to argue with technology, good luck with that. I don't think that's an argument that you really want to even think about trying to have. So, basic steps to creating a plan. You want to have an end goal. Is it going to change? Probably it will. Then you update your plan. But saying I'm not going to have a plan because it's all going to change. If you are CEO of a business, your plan is probably going to be updated or revised every 5 years, if not sooner than that. As I said earlier, you want to identify geographic regions you will consider. There's some people say, there's no way I'm going to Southern California. Great. So now, where do you want to go? Well, I only want to stay in Texas. Nah, that's probably not a good option. You can do that. You may get lucky. Luck is probably not something you really want to depend on. So you may say, okay, if not Texas, I'm willing to look in the South, Southeast, maybe the upper Midwest, the mid-Atlantic coast. That's great. That's a lot. That gives you more flexibility. Okay. And so then you can start identifying companies you think you might like to work for, companies you've heard about, people that you may know through professional associations, and start building connections in those regions around those companies. Because if something happens, that's the way you get ahead of the crowd for the job. And if you have somebody who's either in the organization that you have developed a relationship with or is in the community that is a trusted resource, they're the people that are going to say, hey, this organization is looking for a CEO. They've had a problem. Here's the problem. I know the chairman of the board. I'll be happy to make a call on your behalf if you think you'd like to investigate. That's what you're going to have to do. That's the kind of dynamic you're looking for. These relationships take time. So this is not a sprint. This is not one of those things, oh crap, I've lost my job. Now I need to do a lot of networking. When you do that, you're already lost. You're already behind that rail. And the people who've built the networks, that have the connections, are going to be the people who succeed. They're going to be the people who get to the goal they want to achieve. Keep in mind that you've got to reverse engineer your next steps. You have to do all your homework. But more importantly, you also have to provide for contingency options. People make mistakes. Derailments happen. Layoffs occur. Mergers happen. And so you want to be sure that you're sitting down to say, okay, if this happens, how many days of cash on hand do I have? If I only get a 6-month severance, or how many days of cash do I have? I don't want to have to start dipping into my retirement plan. You need to think about these things in advance, because if you get caught off guard, you get the tap on the shoulder Friday afternoon, you're low on cash, you've got a lot of expenses, you're going to be in trouble. And right now, you're not getting big, huge severance plans like you did during the pandemic. I think that was a lot of guilt that people think that they had to get rid of a lot of people. So now you're seeing, 180 days is considered a pretty decent severance plan today. If you're a senior level executive, you may get a year. That's great. It may take you a year to 14 months to find a job. So there's more than likely, wherever you are, unless you have a huge, equity savings account that you can draw on, you're going to have a period of time between your severance is going to run out and your expenses are going to continue, and you're going to have to cover that. So you need to think about that in advance. You want to try to hold cash. Somebody said, well, why is everybody worried about the market right now? Well, there's no real specific area you can point to. The bond guys say you better pay attention to what's happening in the bond market because that could generate a credit crunch. Some of the 30, 20-year yields, have climbed up and then surpassed 5%, which is usually a red flag. So this is a possibility. And so you want to pay attention. And there is a reason that Warren Buffett is sitting on a boatload of cash. I mean, everybody's trying to figure this out. Buffett is a very astute investor, and he's not sitting on cash because that's how he's going to earn his money. He knows he can't make that much money unless he puts his money to work, and he's not doing it now. When you talk about all the options you have in your finances, you also want to continue to be very mindful of the image you're projecting online in your professional associations when you give presentations, all those things. They need to you need to be able to either directly or indirectly talk about your values, talk about your successes, talk about your values and your mission for your career and for your profession. And you want to be sure that you have a plan that allows you to be consistent. That's extremely important today because you don't have a bunch of people making phone calls anymore trying to dig up stuff on people. It's all being done electronically, and there's more information out there about you than you can possibly imagine. And so that's why we talk about it. It's so important to manage your brand strategy. So another area that's a big problem in career management is people get married, they fall in love, they want to have families, and they don't have certain conversations before they say, I do. And you would be surprised how many people end up having to make big concessions. And sometimes these concessions can do damage in a relationship. I'm living proof of that. I did not have that conversation before I said I do the first time. And the operative term there is the first time. I was a reporter. I was working the mean streets of Houston. I went to work at 5 o'clock in the evening. I covered crime Monday through Friday. I did investigative journalism. Houston was booming. There was so much stuff going on, 500-600 homicides a year. I mean, it was a pretty grim business, but it was exciting, and you were building relationships. And I've had a bunch of front page stories, some exclusives, and a couple of copyrighted stories. So, I had a great time. But my wife was a teacher. Me going to work at 5 o'clock in the evening and getting home at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning was not exactly what she had signed up for. And, I made the change. And I was lucky. I got into public relations at Herman Hospital, where I was born. And they asked me to be the first director of their helicopter ambulance program. Today, it's one of the largest, most successful in the country. Not because of me, but, that was a great opportunity in my career. And I set up the next 14 programs nationally based on that experience. So I made a change. It created friction. It worked out. Ultimately, things didn't work out for the relationship, but we didn't have that conversation. And a lot of people end up getting divorced over career issues that they don't quite identify as career issues. And that can be a big problem. So if you're going to get married or if you're changing careers, you want to have that important conversation about what you each want out of your lives. Here's why that's important. You get married, you're probably going to spend maybe 2 or 3 years trying to decide if that's the right person you want to build a life with. And yet you're only going to spend 25% of your waking hours with them. 75% of your waking hours are going to be spent at work. So you've got to have that conversation. Before you say I do, understand each other's goals and priorities. And that will cut cut down on the friction. And if you're the kind of person who wants to move up, you want to be a CEO of a Fortune 250, great. You're probably going to have to make 4 or 5 moves to get to that point. It's important to have an understanding on the front end of, if your spouse is really supportive of that goal, great. Then you need to be honest and say, this is what it's going to take for us to get there. And maybe you sit down and say, well, can we reconsider? Okay. Those are just important things to consider. And planning, career planning, is a great structure for that to happen. And you got to build family consensus whenever you can. I had a client, I set up a plan for him. It was collaborative, but part of it that we did was key performance indicators and accountability. And what does that mean? Twice a year, I think they did. I think they were doing it twice a year. They sat down. He sat down with his wife. She had her own career, and he had his. He was the primary wage earner. And he sat down. They sat down with each other, twice a year, and he talked about where he was doing well, things that were going on in the office, how he was doing against his, getting ready to move up, and it was. We've been here 2 years. I know you've got a lot of friends. I see maybe another 2 to 3 years here before I need to make another move up. In the old days, if you didn't stay at least 5 or 7 years in an organization, you were considered a job hopper. Now, if you stay too long at a job and you want to be a CEO, that can hurt you. So it's kind of the reverse today. But you want to be accountable to each other. Talk about your successes and keep the lines of communication open. I'd heard from him, late last year, and he said, this has been one of the greatest things I've ever done, and it's been so helpful in our marriage. It's made us more attuned to each other, and it's been a great thing because we just have a stronger relationship. So there was some advantage at that area, and that's something that's important. Now, the make or break activity. Excuse me, you have to network. If you don't network, you're going to have to then do cold calling, or you're going to have to apply for jobs online. And the jobs online that you probably will get will be less money. There will be problematic issues. That's not where you want to go. So begin to network now. Let's talk about that. We call it networking 3.0 because we tie it to a career plan. So you have the regions that you might consider. You have targeted companies. Those may change. So your career plan and your networking plan is constantly going to evolve. But it's important to have specificity and targets. Why? There's something called the Dunbar rule. And this was, written by a British anthropologist, economic anthropologist, whatever the hell that is. And he did a study and concluded that to build effective relationships among mammals, and this was initially done with animals, and then they tested it on people. And you can only essentially manage relationships for between 135 and 150 and be successful in nurturing those relationships. So instead of having 16,000 followers and 12,000 connections or whatever that is on LinkedIn, you need to figure out, I've got 150 people that I'm going to, that I have are 130 people networking, 20 of them are friends and family and all that jazz. But you have to then say, I don't have a lot. I've got to be very strategic, very mindful of where I build relationships. You're going to have primary networking contacts. That's your 130, 150. And then you're going to have secondary contacts. They're not going to be the people that you give all your time to, but they'll be people that say, okay, if I sense something is going to happen, I need to work on developing that relationship more. You need to have a plan when you're networking, that if you're going to a professional meeting, that you try to connect with these people at meetings, that you try to have periodic coffees. It's hard to get that going, but once you build it, it can be extremely, extremely helpful and rewarding. But it must be aligned with your career plans, including your contingency options in case the El Toro poo-poo hits the fan. Targeted plant regions, organizations, and individuals. That's the three main things there. Now, LinkedIn, again, is great for research. It's great for introductions and initial interactions, but LinkedIn is not going to be able to do the heavy lifting for you in building the relationship. You're going to have to be very creative and figure out how to do that. And so you sort of take the approach of, you have a new employee or a new relationship, How can I get to know them? And you do it it takes some time and it takes some work. And people say, I don't have any time. Okay, sorry. You have to make the choices you have to make, but you can't build a relationship unless you invest time in that relationship. Um, Networking connections, again, don't make the referrals. Relationships do. And again, you can't let this be, I lost my job sprint. I got to build a network because I lost my job. Because that way you're going to have to do a lot of changing. As we think about all the change in our lives today, I saw this quote. I really thought it was great. How do you know a man is thinking about his future? He buys 2 bottles of whiskey, not one. And I think there's a great deal of truth to that. So the market is changing. You're going to have to understand the market. You're going to have to understand your value. You're going to have a career plan with a comp plan, a networking plan. And more importantly, you're going to have to become really effective at communicating your value and becoming an elite interviewer. And we've not spent a lot of time on that tonight. It's one of the components. And it's something that if you're going to make an investment in your career, you can figure out the planning piece. You can muddle through the networking 3.0 piece because it's just common sense. Where you probably want to make an investment in your career is learning how to be a better interviewer. That will earn back whatever it costs you to have a master class. And they're not, because there's a lot of time involved. They're not bargain basement prices, but it'll help you. That's an investment that you want to make because it will pay off. So as you start planning, these are the things you need to consider. And I hope this has been helpful information. We talked about having a 45-minute coaching session. I hope that's been helpful. Looking to see any messages. Rita, okay, I'm not going to use your last name. Don't worry, Rita. What's the secret to the plan? Well, as I laid out tonight, Rita, you want to break down and think about what you want to accomplish professionally. Now, some people, this is going to be less important to you because you're not interested in a career, you're interested in a job, and they're 2 different things. A job is something to pay the bills and something to have a great life. And some people are extremely happy and rewarded with that. And that is no sin. That is understanding what you need and what you want is really important. So that's where you have to start. And things are going to change, Rita. I know you indicated in your question that, why waste the time if things are going to change? Things change in businesses, and yet businesses have strategic plans because if they don't, they're going to get lost. And it's real easy today to get lost with your career. So if you have any questions, you can email me at the firm at john@johnself.com, and I'll be happy to go into greater details. It looks like you have a couple of personal issues there that I don't want to get into here. So things are changing, and what I have found is that I always thought I love change, and then when it happens to me, I'm not so sure I like it so much. So let's talk a little bit about the things we're changing at our company to meet the needs. We're really looking to the future. We just like it's changing in the job market, the market's changing for coaching. It's changing how we interact with people. And so we've tried several things. I was extremely excited. We created a subscription plan that you paid $79 a month and you got 4 coaching sessions, 30-minute coaching sessions. You got weekly group coaching, all those things. And the market didn't embrace it. And so that program is ending at the end of this month. It's a big disappointment, but as a mentor of mine said, he said, John, it's not your responsibility to fall in love with a plan you created or a program or a product you created. That's the job of your customer. And if they don't embrace it, then there's a reason. Try to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, then stop. Don't keep failing. Don't keep spending money on something that's not going to be embraced. And it may be a great idea and the market may not be ready for it. Okay, whatever reason, the subscription plan is coming to an end. The weekly coaching plan, the coaching sessions, which were part of that program, will come to an end. We will still do periodic coaching sessions. We will also be doing some videos and some short videos on a new YouTube site, and we'll let you know where that's going to be. We have our newsletter. Our newsletter is expanding because we're finding that there are so many issues now that affect career management, economic policy, politics, a lot of different things. So we're going to talk about the deficit debt issues, how that's being, how certain social safety net programs are driving that, and how we've got to figure out how to make that work without hurting people, because the debt we're accruing is pretty steep. We're already $65 billion. We've already spent more than $65 billion this year than we projected at this point. We have $36 trillion in national debt. That is outstanding. That is just a stunning amount of money. Instead of a 2% GDP deficit this year, we're projected to have 8%, thanks to the one big, bad, beautiful bill. There's some good things in that bill. There's a lot of things in there that are not so good. When you have tough times and you're trying to reduce your spending, you don't do it on the backs of the people who are working hard but can't afford health care and even groceries sometimes. So, those are some policy issues that I'm pretty opinionated about, and you may see that come up periodically in the newsletter. But that's just something I have an interest in. And quite frankly, when we started talking about those issues and how it affected people's careers and their lives, I started getting more interaction and more subscribers. So that was kind of an eye-opening experience. I was concerned because I was in healthcare that I'd get a lot of cancellations. And in fact, I've gotten more subscribers and no cancellations, even though healthcare is a pretty conservative industry. We started out in 2022 with online recorded courses, and we covered the interview, we covered the resume, we covered networking, we covered all the major components. And that too was a great idea. And a lot of people were really piling on to that concept using LMS, education learning management systems. And we use Thinkific in Vancouver, and we're still going to use them for you to transact any courses you want to buy. Instead of recorded courses, they're all going to be live courses, Zoom courses on a weekly basis with in the interview course, you'll have like 5 mock interviews with feedback. So that's the kind of thing we'll be doing. And people prefer the one-on-one coaching versus the online replay. People lose interest in that. So those recorded courses will be eliminated on July 31st. Again, the videos and the shorts will continue, and hope you'll find that of interest. And the premium coaching plans are all being updated. So that's kind of what the future looks like for us. The Guiding Your Career brand is staying put for a while. Our newsletter, Guiding Your Career Report, that's going to have a rebrand and a name that reflects a broader area of issues. It's still all going to come back and connect with employment and your career and your life. And it's going to hopefully create an opportunity. If I say something in the newsletter you don't like, please know that I listen. I try to be thoughtful, and I try to learn. And if you want to comment on the newsletter, if you're a paid subscriber, you have that option. I don't set the rules. Substack sets the rules about who gets to comment. So anyway, we have just under 1,000 subscribers, and the paid subscriber list, thank goodness, is growing. So those are things that we're working on. The other thing we're looking on is the possibility of creating a podcast and bringing in key people in the industry, people in career management, other people who are experts who can give you a different perspective. And so that's something we're also working on. So I hope this information has been helpful to you tonight. This is the first time we've done an evening group coaching session. So we hope that it's been beneficial. This will be up on YouTube for replay at Guiding Your Career, John G. Self. You can look at it there if you want to go back and do any research. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I've enjoyed being with you. And I hope we get to see each other again soon. Again, if you have any questions about your career, you can reach me at john@johngself.com. And our webpage at Thinkific is johngself.com. And you'll see all of our courses there. So again, I really want to tell you how much we appreciate you joining us tonight. And thank you for being here. And we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Cheers, everyone.